Animal welfare. All I can say is that every time a big truck drives by with pigs inside of it, I do cry, and they look very sad.
Can you tell me what the Farm Bill is?
Nope. Farm bill? Yeah, nope.
Animal welfare? Well, I assume that's when an animal family is below the poverty line and receives additional support from the government. So the Farm Bill is the man who has worked on the farm for 80 years.
Tell me, what do you know about Proposition 12 in California?
Oh, nothing. I know nothing about that. I'm so sorry. Animal welfare, like how they take care of the animals. You know, agricultural and food things.
I don't know what the Farm Bill is.
Welcome back, everyone, to the CAP podcast, Contemporary Issues in Agriculture podcast. I am your co-host, Sidney Schnor.
And I'm Jessica Rodman, and today we will be talking about carbon capture. We've got some really great guests lined up, brought in by our students, and I'm pretty excited for you to hear what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, carbon capture is something that is talked about a lot in the state of Iowa. They tried to run they're trying to run pipelines for ethanol plants, and that's just a short little introduction on what they're going to talk about. So we will turn it over to Abby and Jillian to tell us more about carbon capture.
I'm Abby Feldpausch.
And I'm Jillian Woodall.
We're both students in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Iowa State University with deep roots in Iowa agriculture, as we both grew up on generational family farms in central Iowa. Today, we're excited to bring you a conversation where we dive deep into a topic that has been dominating agricultural news: carbon sequestration and its growing role in the ethanol and agricultural industries. As climate change continues to be a concern worldwide and greenhouse gas emissions remain a driving force in this issue, the agricultural industry has been pointed at due to its potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Across America, several markets have emerged in an effort to achieve net zero carbon emissions. According to the USDA's 2017 Census of Agriculture, the United States has over 900 million acres of land in farms and an additional 470 million acres of privately owned forests and woodlands. This is the approximate 9% of annual greenhouse emissions that agriculture contributes to the total gross U.S. greenhouse gas emissions annually. As we know, every individual across the country depends on agriculture for food, fiber, and the stewardship of our natural resources. But climate issues, specifically greenhouse gas emissions, are creating uncertainty and concern, resulting in the threat of resilience for some agricultural practices.
According to the USDA, farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners can generate carbon credits by adopting practices to reduce emissions or sequester carbon on their land. These markets incentivize sustainability by providing farmers proper compensation for these environmental benefits through carbon credits. Carbon credits are earned when producers voluntarily participate in eligible practices that actively reduce greenhouse gas emissions or increase the carbon sequestration process. Some of these practices include no-till, vegetated buffers, mulching, reforestation, cover cropping, and integrated nutrient management, all of which decrease carbon losses while increasing carbon inputs. Most recently, we've seen reports of proposed carbon pipelines that have dominated much of the carbon conversation. Carbon sequestration is a proposed solution for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and promoting the sustainability of ethanol production for corn producers. Navigator CO2, Summit Carbon Solutions, and Wolf Carbon Solutions are the three main companies that have worked on proposing carbon pipeline routes throughout several Midwestern states, including Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. These pipelines are intended to capture carbon dioxide from biorefineries such as ethanol plants, compress the CO2, and channel it through the pipeline system to permanently store in underground rock formations. These proposals have captured the attention of many individuals across the country, as some view this as a solution to reducing the carbon footprint of ethanol production and creating long lasting economic viability for the agriculture industry. On the other hand, many landowners along the pipeline have raised concerns surrounding safety, environmental benefits, and property rights. Today, we're lucky to have insight provided by three professionals, each of whom is extremely passionate and knowledgeable about carbon sequestration and its future.
Our first guest, Mason Claude, is a technical agronomist at BW Fusion, while also owning his own land. Mason Claude is joining us today to discuss carbon capture and storage. He currently works for BW Fusion as a technical agronomist for Minnesota and Iowa. Before we begin, Mason, would you like to give us a background of yourself and tell more about what your family farm does?
I'm from a row crop farm in north central Iowa, Webster City. I raise corn and soybeans, and then have a little bit of alfalfa. Did used to have quite a few cattle and kind of got out of that recently. But then, basically gained a lot of experience agronomically there, and then transitioned into an agronomist for my full-time job, and then my second full-time job is farming.
Perfect. So, how does your role at BW Fusion and then your past research experience affect your opinion on carbon and carbon capture?
Yeah, so I'm just a nerdy farmer, and I think that's the definition of an agronomist. So basically, every day what BW focuses on is soil health and how to manipulate soil health for farmer profitability. And at the backbone of that is how to understand carbon, how it works, and obviously its impacts, and then how to, again, manipulate it to improve your bottom dollar. So anyway, that's essentially what my day-to-day is. That's all I really focus on, is how do I change different fertility practices, management styles, tillage practices, whatever we need in order to manage a more carbon efficient program in order to build an agronomic benefit as well as an economic benefit.
Being a farmer yourself, how does this affect your farming practices?
I'd say it carbon affects my farming practices simply from an agronomic perspective only. So just to make nutrition more efficient. I think that it's kind of obviously wasteful to be over applying nutrition or adopting farming practices that are negatively impacting my longevity or soil sustainability or soil resiliency. And so I only look at really carbon as an agronomic benefit of how do I increase nutrient solubility, plant availability to that nutrition, as well as increase in yield and again, soil sustainability.
So, being an Iowa farmer yourself, how do you expect the ethanol and agricultural industries to remain viable without carbon capture and storage processes being put into place as sustainability and climate change continue to be an issue at the forefront of people's minds?
Yeah, I think ethanol in general is it's very sustainable as it is. I think that by just from the infrastructure alone that went into ethanol getting introduced into Iowa, it's really not going anywhere. I don't think it's reliant on carbon programs or carbon credit programs to continue to push that industry to thrive. I think the last statistic was like over half, or at least over a third of our grain goes towards fuel more so than food anymore. So the ethanol industry is going to be booming for a very long time simply because it's a renewable resource for fuel. I don't think it's necessarily reliant on the growth of a carbon credit program or anything like that. Really in regards to carbon and the whole, movement to be carbon neutral and companies trying to be more carbon neutral, one of the biggest issues I see in all of this is that here we are focusing on an industry that only makes up about 10% of CO2 emissions in our atmosphere. And corn farming specifically, which is what the ethanol plant is obviously involved with, makes up for a very small portion of that 10%. And so really the large impact, if we're really worried about climate change, is not going to change a whole lot on the grand scheme of things, since it is, again, a percent of a percent to the point where it's such a small piece of the pie, it's really not going to impact anything on the large scale. Not to mention what we do here in the state of Iowa doesn't stop at our borders. So CO2 moves all over the atmosphere. So if we really want to do something to manage climate change, and if it's truly an issue that people want to take care of, then they need to start sorting out other industries as well as other areas in the world that are horrible with carbon emissions, and figure out how to make that a little bit more sustainable rather than trying to focus on 2% of CO2 emissions in the entire United States.
Thank you. And then where do you see the state of carbon capture and storage being in 5 years?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, based off that previous answer, I honestly hope nowhere. Carbon credit programs in general, they don't know how to measure carbon. They don't understand carbon. They don't know how to understand carbon. So really, I hope that the industry is nowhere. All it really is a sanctioned industry that's going to increase tax revenue, and that's really the only reason why it's going anywhere. And then hopefully it's going to make larger corporations like the ethanol plants more money, which the whole sales pitch for farmers is that as long as the ethanol plant's happy, then you're going to be happy because they're going to keep buying your corn. But really they're going to keep buying it anyway because they have to produce fuel. They have to produce RINs numbers anyway, which was an industry that I think that this carbon credit thing is going to go towards. If anybody remembers renewable identification numbers with the ethanol industry, basically the ethanol industry was booming because they got to trade these RINs numbers, and then the government came in and put a cap on it. And so these carbon credits are going to be a very similar issue where, they might be able to make a decent amount of money here in the short term, but long term, those carbon credits are going to get capped for whatever reason, or maybe there's going to be some sort of government regulation saying, well, you can't sell your carbon credits to this ethanol plant who's not doing enough for carbon emissions or whatever. And so really it's an industry that's similar to the renewable identification number trading. I think it's going to be very, very similar, where it's going to boom for a hot minute. It's going to make ethanol plants a lot of money. It's not going to make farmers any money. And it's going to be very short-lived and not go anywhere. So I really don't think in 5 years it's at all going to be a thing similar to RINs numbers. Nobody even knows what RINs is hardly anymore because they quit trading them because there's no value to them anymore because the government put a cap on it. So carbon is going to be a very similar thing because, again, they don't know how to track it. They don't know how to measure it or quantify it, let alone trickle it down to a grassroots level. That was one of my biggest hangups with it as a farmer, is that basically I get lumped into every other farmer in my area. So let's say I go ahead and adopt a lot of renewable practices. Let's say I adopt cover crops and no-till, and I do all of these amazing, cool, regenerative things. All of that hard work really goes to nothing because I get lumped into the neighbor that's doing moldboard plow farming and over applying, 300 pounds of nitrogen or something. So, really it's not going to benefit the extra work put in just for a few bucks an acre for a short-term gain. As a global level, on a global level, when it comes to climate activism or climate change, but it's also, really not going to make an impact long-term in general. I think it's going to be gone in about 3 to 5 years.
Thank you so much for taking the time with us today and just to give us a little more of an insight into carbon capture and your opinions. We really appreciate it.
We're so glad we were able to talk to Mason about his opinions involving carbon capture and storage, as he had a really interesting perspective, focusing hard into the agronomic side of the issue and the downfalls carbon capture could have. Contrastingly, our next guest, Joe Heinrich, is the executive director of the Smart Carbon Network, working to educate the public about the long-term benefits and viability carbon capture could create for agriculture. We have guest Joe Heinrich, current executive director of Smart Carbon Network, with us to give us some insight into the potential benefits of carbon capture and what he's currently doing to advocate for the implementation of these practices. So I guess before we really kind of dive in, Joe, do you want to give us just some background on your experiences and then how you kind of got to where you are today with Smart Carbon Network?
You bet. I've been first off, I'm a diversified farmer over in Eastern Iowa. We farm with a nephew and son-in-law and their families here. And I also always say my great nephew who's 14 and thinks he runs the place. So we have a lot of fun here. Diversified operation, beef, cow-calf, dairy operation, along with corn, soybeans, and hay. So we stay out of trouble, let's put it that way. And I started seeing this whole issue with carbon capture in my time on Iowa Farm Bureau Board of Directors. I was vice president for 11 years. And the last couple of years that I was vice president, this issue kept popping up around the edges is what I called it. We never really took a policy stance on it, never really got too in depth on it, but there was a lot of concern out there, a lot of emotion already. And as I started looking into it, I realized how much misinformation there is on this, and how much we focus on just part of the whole, I call it the puzzle, and how much we focus on just that one part. So when I got done with my term as vice president, I was approached by a few people to consult with possibly doing basically a third party independent coalition. It's different businesses, organizations, and groups. And as I was helping them kind of put together, giving ideas, they asked if I would lead it. And so that's how I ended up as executive director of Smart Carbon Network. We kicked off in May, actually did the official launch, and have been very busy discussing this across the whole Midwest. Our footprint is Illinois, Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska a little bit, and then Iowa, of course. So got pretty large Midwest footprint to cover.
As you mentioned, you're a farmer and landowner yourself. So what are you currently doing in your farming operation to mitigate GHG emissions? And along with that, why do you believe carbon capture is a solution?
Well, a lot of things that we're doing are like other farmers. We're doing no-till. We do cover crops whenever we are able to. We have a lot of forest here, so we also can mitigate CO2 that way. There's a lot of different things we do as we look at everything, and so I think those are some of the things we're doing here. The reason I'm pretty strong on carbon capture is, a lot of people talk about this being a political issue. You're on one side or the other, and I come at it from economics. This is a defining issue for agriculture and rural communities in the next 10 years. I truly believe that. And the reason that is because what it will do for our economy now, if we do or don't have it, and the opportunities that we have with carbon capture down the road because of what you can do with that product. We really need to talk about carbon, the CO2, as a commodity, because that really is our next commodity in agriculture that we've got control over as agriculture, and we can benefit from it in big ways.
So now that you're currently sitting as executive director of the Smart Carbon Network, could you just give us some more information on really what the organization is pushing for, what their mission is, and then what you're doing as an organization to promote and facilitate the implementation of carbon capture?
Yeah, well, when we put it together, our goal was to be that independent third party that can talk about the issues, answer questions, and be a trusted source for information. And that's our job. We are pro carbon capture, obviously, and that's where I talked about, because of the economics. It's just really important to be talking about the whole picture. We get so tied up in the transportation part of this, that pipeline, and we keep talking about how you're going to do this, how we can't do that. Let's talk about the why we need it. And that's what Smart Carbon is doing, is we're talking about the why. We need it because, first off, when you look at the ethanol production, that's the obvious one. That's the low-hanging fruit. There's been different studies saying it could cost 75 cents a bushel in basis if we don't have this. I'm conservative. I say 50 cents a bushel. 50 cents a bushel and 200 bushel corn. We didn't do that this year with the dry weather, but normally 200 bushel corn in eastern Iowa, that's $100 an acre. That's what it does immediately and that's what we talk about. We also talk about that turnover dollars because of those ethanol plants out in those rural communities, what it's doing for jobs, what it's doing for the economies there, along with, then you get into fertilizer plants, you get into plastic, you also get into things that people don't think about, and that's base load electricity. That's going to have to be low carbon. That's going to be regulated in that particular case. They're going to have to figure out a way to lower their carbon score, because base load electricity cannot come from wind or solar. It's got to come from gas or coal. And so carbon capture is being talked about there, and that's what they want to do. So what does that do for available, reliable, and affordable electricity? So there's so many things, first part. So we talk about a lot of those things with Smart Carbon when we're out talking. We also talk about those uses down the road. This is amazing what people are finding out that we can do with CO2 to make things. And the thing is, if we're going to do that, if we're going to make cement out of CO2, if we're going to do insulation, um, if when they look at the hydrogen, methanol, that's all low carbon. That they're using CO2 within that. Well, if they're going to do this, then that's a great thing. We're turning it into a co-product instead of a byproduct. And if we're going to do that, let's do that in the Midwest. Let's do that in those rural communities for economic development. And that's that 10 years down the road where this can have great effects because of where the carbon's being captured is in this area. So, and that's what we talk a lot about, and try to separate those myths and that misinformation and give the facts as far as safety and everything. So
Yeah, so obviously it's a very hot topic, like we talked about, and there's some obvious pushback. So how is the Smart Carbon Network responding to recent developments such as Navigator CO2 backing away from their proposed plan, and then Summit running into regulatory problems in the Dakotas? How is Smart Carbon Solutions kind of responding to those issues, and what's the plan going forward?
well, I would say I'm disappointed to see Navigator step back from it. I was, because that affects the ones in our area, those ethanol plants, and they're going to have to do something with capturing CO2. And if they don't have a way to transport it, the other two forms of transportation are going to be over the road or rail, and both are more expensive. And by all means, I don't think I'd get any argument with anybody that's not as safe and efficient as putting it into a pipe. And that was the whole reason. So I was disappointed with that. We were obviously, but as far as what we're doing, our message stays the same. We're out there talking about these issues because each area has a different concern. So we try to go into regions and talk about the concerns. Property rights is a big one over in South Dakota. And so we talk about, let's work with those, let's work with those operators to make sure that you're getting your questions answered, doing everything you can. It's a two-way street, but the landowners need to make sure they're listening. Illinois is a big thing about safety because they're going to be storing it. So a lot of it's going through there. So we talk over there, we're answering a lot of questions and talking to a lot of people about the safety, the track record of CO2. It's been around since the 1970s, 50 years, 2 incidences on a pipeline. That there's been 2 accidents. That's a pretty good track record, actually. And there's been no deaths. You don't like seeing anybody get injured, but on the same note, the track record is just amazing. And the safety that has to go through this, the regulation that they're put through. So that's another thing we talk about. So it depends on the area, but we're really there to answer questions. And we're a 501c6, and that's an educational coalition. So we don't go in and lobby on any particular issues. We're just there to answer questions. And we do that with everybody from governors and state legislators, U.S. congressmen, senators, down to local FFA groups, I guess you could say, economic development committees in towns, Chamber of Commerce's. There's just, we hit all the gambits. I say it's one handshake at a time a lot of times. You just got to go out and talk to people and listen to them and answer questions. And that's what we're trying to do.
Where do you see the state of carbon capture and storage being in 5 years?
My hope is that they're able to start getting some of the transportation part worked out. And by worked out, I don't mean that they should just run it through and say it's all great. No, there's questions that need to be answered. And so those companies that are there need to answer. There's good questions out there that people are asking, but there's also good answers. And so I would hope the companies are doing that. We're as Smart Carbon going to try to answer some of those questions. I would hope some of those systems start going through. And I think in 5 years, my hope would be that these lines are getting put into place, the transportation part, so that we're able to capture that carbon and capture the benefits. My other hope in 5 years is we're starting to see those industries develop. Down in Decatur area, we were talking with ADM, and there's several companies that want to come into that area because they don't have to deal with transportation. And so they're going to use CO2. They don't have to move it. And so you see those industries, they're going to move to areas that are the least how can I say it, the least disruptive, the least path of least resistance. So if we don't have transportation lines where we can do that in rural communities in Iowa, we're going to miss that opportunity. So I hope those lines are there, because then we can start developing those economies, those businesses in the rural communities, because it's an exciting future.
Well, thank you so much for taking time with us to kind of discuss carbon capture and everything that's going on with you and the Smart Carbon Network. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. I don't know if you checked the website, but www.smartcarbon.com. So if anybody has questions, contact Smart Carbon, contact myself. I'm glad to visit about it, and we'll travel. Very used to that, so we'll go out.
How many people are on your team at the Smart Carbon Network?
My core team works with we have 6 right now, and then how we've done it is we basically will get help in each state, because what we're trying to do is hook up with groups that have that footprint, have those fingers already, so we can get a hold of the people we need to talk to. And so we found that the most effective right now. So the core team is kind of small, but we have a lot of people out in the states helping us out, and I think that makes us very nimble, very agile as far as getting into the places we need to get into. I've been really impressed with that over the last 6 months, because the number of doors that just get open for us are amazing to get to talk to, and people want to talk about. I think the other thing I would comment about this, the thing that I've seen the most, is there are so many people that want to talk about this issue but are scared to, because there's so much emotion around it, and there's a lot of vent up. I don't want to say anger, but people are very anti on it, and a lot of these people either want to have more information, or they're in favor of it and they're afraid to talk about it. And so one thing I've said is we'll be the ones to put our head above the log and see what happens, but we need to have the discussion. And I think that's the big point I would make to you two on this, is we got to have that discussion, because the questions can be worked through, but the only way you can work through them is to have the discussion. I challenge everybody to be Iowa nice and respect each other's opinions and work through it. And so you two have a great day. Good luck with it. And if you have any other questions, feel free to give me a call.
Will do. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed our conversation with Joe, getting to know more about who he is and what he is doing with the Smart Carbon Network to promote carbon capture, as he really focused in on the economic benefits and potential opportunities within the industry. Our third and final guest, Iowa Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Grant Menke, talked further about how lowering the carbon intensity of ethanol production could benefit Iowa farmers' production and profitability, while also sharing what this issue looks like within the Iowa legislature. Well, we are excited to introduce our last guest, Grant Menke, Iowa Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, who will be able to provide us with further insight into the Department of Agriculture's involvement in the issue of carbon capture. Grant, thank you so much for being here today. To start, could you give us a background on your experience and roles before being named Deputy Secretary, and what your new role entails?
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Abby. Thank you, Jillian, for the opportunity to be here with you today. My farm background goes back to a small family farm that I grew up on in O'Brien County in Northwest Iowa. And after high school, went to the University of Northern Iowa. And growing up through the 1980s and the 1990s, as I went off to college, agriculture was honestly the furthest thing from my mind. But when I graduated from college, I ended up moving out to Washington, D.C., had a number of interesting jobs, but the one that really solidified and reinvigorated my love for agriculture was working for Senator Chuck Grassley on the United States Senate Finance Committee when he was the chairman of the Finance Committee, working on tax and trade issues, and learning that people from other parts of the country have some strong opinions and honestly misguided opinions on what Iowa agriculture and what farm living in rural communities in the Midwest is all about. That got me a little bit defensive at first, admittedly, but it really just reignited my passion for agriculture. And since then, I've been working in ag ever since. After moving back to Iowa, I've worked at the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, the largest state trade association representing Iowa's ethanol and biodiesel producers. I then worked for the USDA Rural Development as the state director of rural development, focusing on community economic development and furthering the vitality of our rural communities throughout the state of Iowa. After that, worked for Iowa Corn as the Vice President of Market Development. And now today, I'm very proud to serve alongside Secretary of Agriculture Mike Negg as the Deputy Secretary. At the Department of Agriculture, we aim to provide leadership in all aspects of Iowa agriculture to ensure consumer safety, consumer protection, food safety, and animal health, and then to promote conservation efforts to preserve our land and enhance water quality for the next generation. We have about 370 employees located in Des Moines, in Ankeny, and in every county around the state. And we have 14 diverse bureaus that work on things from climatology and entomology to mines and minerals. Right now, we're in the middle of a response to the next iteration of the highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak. But we cover so many different areas: soil conservation, water quality, feed and fertilizer, grain warehouses, dairy, pesticides, you name it. So it's been a great experience working for Secretary Negg in the department for the last 10 months.
So as you kind of mentioned before, you have a significant background in both the ethanol and corn industries. So how do you expect carbon capture to affect these sectors, specifically within Iowa agriculture?
Well, thank you for that question. And let me just first give the blanket caveat that the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship does not have a specific position on the issue of carbon capture and sequestration and carbon capture and sequestration pipelines. However, as I mentioned, providing leadership in all aspects of Iowa agriculture means we are asked questions about this all the time. And as Secretary Negg has said repeatedly when asked about this topic on the question of whether carbon capture is important to the ethanol and corn industries, the answer is unequivocally yes. The future of these projects is important as another step in Iowa's history of innovation in value-added agriculture. And growing up in the 80s and 90s, I came from a time from when I was born to when I graduated from high school, where there were only 2 years where the average market price for corn was higher than the cost of production. So that is very difficult economically to pencil out a living, and farmers were kept going during the 80s and 90s because of a massive farm bill, government payments, direct payments, countercyclical payments, LDP payments, things like that, because we were producing more than there was demand for the crops that we produced. That changed when the ethanol industry began to grow in Iowa. I mean, we went from producing 10 billion bushels of corn, roughly, in the United States, to all of a sudden, we're now looking at a 15.2 billion bushel corn crop out there around the country today. That would not have happened without the growth in the ethanol industry. So today we have over 5 billion bushels of corn demand for ethanol. And while the growth in ethanol has been significant, it has not taken away from those other key uses of corn: for feed, for food, for exports, for industrial uses, for all of those things that we have been typical important uses for corn. Ethanol has been the cherry on top of that, and a 5 billion bushel cherry at that. So how does carbon capture fit into this? So when the ethanol industry began, plants were built to produce ethanol. And then everything else was a byproduct, something that they had to figure out how to dispose of or get rid of somehow. Now, today in the ethanol industry, plants are adding value to every part of that process. So not only for a bushel of corn do you get 3 gallons of ethanol, you also get 16 pounds of high protein, nutrient dense animal feed. You also get about a pound of corn oil, but a third of that kernel is also CO2. And some plants have found a way to get some value out of that CO2. I mean, amazingly, ethanol plants produce a clean CO2, a food grade CO2 that is some of the cleanest of any production process in the world. So it is great for frozen foods, for carbonated beverages, for processing animals. There's a number of great uses today, but in this environment that we're in today, where carbon intensity and carbon reduction and carbon removal are such important focuses, policy focuses, to varying degrees throughout the United States and around the world, there is even more potential value for carbon dioxide, the ethanol process, based on carbon removal, carbon reduction and carbon removal. Literally, it's just great to think about how this process works. So to grow corn, you are sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere to help grow the plant. That CO2 is then concentrated in the kernel. The kernel is then processed at the ethanol plant, makes all of the co-products that we discussed. If you can capture that CO2, liquefy it, pressurize it, bury it underground, you are literally taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and removing it permanently, which again, there's no other process out there that even envisions that type of carbon removal. So there is value associated with that today. And lower carbon intensity will open up new, higher value marketplace opportunities for ethanol, which will lead to greater ethanol demand and profitability and greater corn demand and profitability. So we can discuss some more of those markets as we continue the conversation. But the last thing I'm going to say is lowering carbon intensity of ethanol is important to expand new markets. So one of those important markets is sustainable aviation fuel. And that is, we produce about 15 to 16 billion gallons of ethanol and use that in the United States and around the world today. But if we were to tap into that sustainable aviation fuel market in a big way, that could be the next ethanol type of disrupting marketplace opportunity that leads to greater corn demand, greater profitability. But we can't get there unless we lower carbon intensity of our ethanol. Carbon capture is not the only way, but it's one way to reduce carbon intensity significantly.
And obviously this is a controversial topic, garnering a lot of emotion on both sides. What is being asked of the Iowa Department of Ag Land Stewardship regarding the policies or regulations of both sides of the issue?
Yeah, great question. So there's lots of policy requests that are out there right now, lots of strong opinions on both sides of this issue. But a lot of the ones out there today involve the process of approving and implementing pipeline projects in the state of Iowa. For instance, last legislative session in the Iowa legislature, the House of Representatives passed a bill called House File 565, which passed with a strong over 70 votes, I believe. and it would expand landowner protections for damages caused by the installation of a pipeline, and that could include damage to the land, damage to any infrastructure on the land, or any crop yield loss as well. It also included land restoration requirements and enhancement of those. And then it actually did single out liquefied carbon dioxide pipelines by prohibiting the granting of eminent domain for a pipeline project unless the company that's applying could acquire at least 90% of the affected miles of that route from voluntary easements. So that did pass the House. No action was taken on it in the Senate. But that remains a live bill that could be brought up by the Senate this year. We'll have to see if that happens or not. There are competing interests, again, on both sides of these issues, which are strongly bipartisan, I want to reiterate. So there are Republicans and Democrats very much on both sides of this issue. Some want to see these projects go through as quickly as possible because they believe they are essential to the future of ethanol for corn farming and Iowa agriculture as a whole. And some are opposed to the pipelines just as strongly, or if not stronger, based on concerns over private property rights, some safety concerns, and some of these are very very well-founded concerns. But then some are opposed to the projects just because they are opposed to modern agriculture as well. So there's different degrees of seriousness, I believe, in terms of the concerns that are being raised. But there is no question that those competing interests of the strength and the growth and the viability of Iowa agriculture going forward, and balancing that out with private property, landowner rights, it is a challenging balance.
So with this being such a high emotion, hot button issue, and like you just said, it's a bipartisan issue as well, as the 2024 election continues to ramp up, how do you foresee this topic affecting the race?
So I believe it could have a limited role in the 2024 election race. I mean, there are a lot of other issues out there that are probably going to be higher priority issues. I mean, whenever you're talking about the economy and inflation in the ag world, I mean, we talk about, a farm bill, the high cost of inputs, labor and trucker shortages, trade uncertainty, global instability, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, what's happening in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas, threats to crop protection tools like glyphosate and atrazine, all of these, and then education, social issues. I do believe there's a lot of other issues that will be higher impact in terms of the 2024 election, but I do believe in certain races, there may be candidates who try to differentiate themselves through either their support or their opposition to this topic.
As we look ahead, where do you see the state of carbon capture and storage being in the next 5 years?
That's one of those questions where it really depends. So I think to just, I don't know, to start us on the path of answering that question, I would just remind the audience where we are at in the process. So there's been a lot of action on this topic, even though the legislature isn't in session. The fact that you scheduled this topic for this week is actually quite appropriate because within the last couple of weeks, of course, Navigator CO2 has withdrawn its pipeline project, which was going to, I believe they had 30 ethanol plants and a fertilizer plant signed up, and they announced that they would be suspending their project. The Iowa Utilities Board just finished its hearing process, and I just want to review my notes here to make sure I get this right, but literally the hearings ended this Wednesday, November 8th. And it was the longest public hearing ever held by the Iowa Utilities Board, over 8 weeks of testimony and hearings. And the longest other hearing before that was the Dakota Access Pipeline, and that lasted 11 days. And this one lasted 8 weeks. So now that hearing process has taken place, they've heard from literally thousands of comments, hundreds of witnesses, I mean, reams of paper submitted. Now the IUB will set a schedule for additional legal filings, and after they review Iowa law, the evidence, the testimony, the exhibits, the written comments, they will issue a final decision on the application. And they can either grant the permit, they can grant the permit with modifications, or they can deny the permit. So, and there's no deadline for them to issue this. So it'll probably take a while. They have lots of things to review, but that is a very important decision point when we look ahead 5 years on what might be happening on this topic. The decision made by the Iowa Utilities Board there will be very important to that. So if the projects do not move forward, honestly, I do believe carbon capture will happen in other states, not Iowa. And right now, today, it's interesting. I was at the Farm Progress Show this past, at the late August or early September, and the grounds of the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois, are actually over an active CO2 capture well, because ADM in Decatur for the last 10 years has actually been doing this technology, taking their CO2, capturing it, liquefying it, pressurizing it, injecting it over a mile below the surface in wells that are incidentally right below the Farm Progress Show grounds. So there's other places in Illinois, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, where there may be geology suitable for a plant to just do this themselves without a pipeline. And that honestly would put Iowa ethanol plants at a disadvantage. On the flip side, if these projects do go forward, I would see, again, growth in ethanol demand, a continued ability of ethanol to compete as the lowest cost, lowest carbon fuel in the marketplace. You hear lots about electric vehicles right now, and they are a fine option for some people, but they have a whole lot of limitations. And with the ability to take carbon out of the atmosphere and bury it underground permanently through this type of a process, ethanol has the ability to be a lower carbon fuel than an electric vehicle could ever be. So there's a opportunity for ethanol to continue to be the lowest cost and lowest carbon fuel available, which would open up those opportunities for sustainable aviation fuel. And again, if that market really takes off, we could be looking at the next ethanol that drives even more demand for the corn that we produce here in the state. And people always say, well, if we get more demand for, sustainable aviation fuel is 100 billion gallon market, how in the world are we going to produce enough corn to do that? Well, it won't be entirely just from corn, but never forget, farmers have an ability to overproduce a market like better than anyone you've ever seen. You give a farmer a market, they will find an opportunity to not only meet that market, but probably overproduce that market. And so that's a challenge that we have the best farmers in the world here in the state of Iowa, and I believe we are firmly up for that challenge. So it's hard to say where we're going to be. I didn't really answer your question directly. I think there's two paths, really. Really highly expanded growth with ethanol being the lowest carbon, lowest cost fuel in the marketplace, or other states are going to take over that leadership role that we've enjoyed for the last 20 years.
Well, thank you so much, Grant, for joining us and giving us some further insight. If any of our listeners want to dig deeper into the topic of carbon capture, what resources are available from the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship to utilize in making a informed decision on the topic of carbon capture?
So yes, that's a great question. And just to reiterate once again, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, since we do not have jurisdiction over carbon capture, we don't actually offer any specific resources on the topic. However, I can offer the following recommendations so starting with the Iowa Utilities Board. So again, the Iowa Utilities Board has the authority over the routing and siting of any hazardous liquid pipelines in Iowa. So anyone who wants to put in a pipeline has to go to the Iowa Utilities Board at iub.iowa.gov. That's iub.iowa.gov. There's tremendous amount of resources talking about their processes, about things like eminent domain, about these specific carbon capture and sequestration pipeline projects. So that's a great place to start for information. I would always encourage people to also go to their trusted farm organizations. Iowa Corn, Iowa Farm Bureau, Iowa Soybeans, Iowa Cattle, Iowa Pork, Iowa Turkey, Iowa Poultry, any of those groups will have something to share on this topic. I know Iowa Farm Bureau has a lot of resources. Iowa Corn has a document on their website that talks about agricultural landowners' guide to carbon pipeline easement agreements. That's a free resource that people can get to look at and say, man, what if I'm approached by one of these? What are some of the questions I should be asking? What are some of the topics I should be considering? There's a free document there that was prepared by legal counsel that can just give people an idea of some of the questions they should be considering. The pipeline companies themselves, people should talk to them, especially if you're a landowner who has been approached about one of these projects. Talk to them. I encourage people to have the conversations and get the information straight from the horse's mouth. Obviously, friends and neighbors are always good and interesting resources to see what experiences people have on the topic. And finally, before anyone ever signs any type of legal document, always recommend seeking legal advice as well, just to make sure that you're doing what's best for yourself, your family, and your operation.
Great. Well, thank you again so much. We really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have the opportunity to speak with Grant and learn more about how the topic of carbon sequestration could impact Iowa agriculture and its producers. He provided some really great insight into what he's seen in his travels across the Midwest.
All three of our guests provided such knowledgeable and different perspectives on this issue. I know after our conversations, it really made me want to dig deeper into some of the resources they provided and the key points they made. Some of Jillian and my biggest takeaways were how some individuals are viewing carbon as agriculture's next big commodity. Joe dove into how we as agriculturalists really have control over what we do with carbon and its potential to benefit producers in big ways because of everything you can do with it. Kind of going off of what Joe had said, when Grant talked about the opportunities in new and expanding markets available in agriculture, if we can lower the carbon intensity of producing ethanol, specifically with sustainable aviation fuel and the increase that would have in corn production and profitability for Iowa farmers. While carbon pipelines aren't the only way to accomplish lower carbon intensity, it really piqued our interest on how these potential markets are being used to persuade producers in favor of carbon pipeline projects.
For sure, and it kind of brought us back to our first conversation with Mason as he talked about how a big issue for him surrounding carbon capture is that companies don't bring carbon capture down to a grassroots level, focusing on each individual farmer's concerns and opinions. So we're excited to continue learning more and developing our own opinions on the issue as it continues to grow and evolve.
Yes, and we encourage all of you listening to go do some research for yourself. This is a very complex topic with a lot of information and emotion surrounding it, so gathering opinions and knowledge from a variety of sources is extremely important in creating your own stance on the issue. Some of the resources mentioned throughout our conversations were the Iowa Utilities Board website, as the Iowa Utilities Board has authority over the routing and siting of all pipelines in Iowa, as well as your trusted farm organization, as most commodity groups have information on their websites. I know for sure that Iowa Corn has some very good resources, as well as the Iowa Farm Bureau. You can also look up the carbon pipeline companies themselves. Some of the big ones we talked about today were Navigator CO2, Summit Carbon Solutions, and Wolf Carbon Solutions, and they're all going to have some really good information on what the benefits of carbon capture could be, what their proposed pipeline routes are, and they also address safety and property concerns for landowners as well. You can also search Smart Carbon Solutions. As Joe mentioned, their website has some great information and resources about the projects that they're supporting, and of course, just talking to your friends and family members, as well as your state representatives, to learn more about their opinions and how it may impact you personally.
Thank you, Abby and Jillian, for bringing up this conversation and having such a great time with these guests. I think it's really interesting to hear about carbon capture, especially some of the politics surrounding it and how that can affect us and everybody else in our society.
Yeah, I listened to an agricultural podcast, and they talk about carbon capping, carbon sequestration in the soil, and just generally where to put CO2, since there seems to be a lot of it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. To email us with any comments, questions, or concerns, please send us an email at contemporary@iastate.edu.